Welcome to the Theory of Change podcast. My name is Courtney Tolmie, and I work with the Results for Development Institute. And over the next several minutes, I'm going to answer some common questions about theories of change for think tanks that are just starting to think about using this helpful tool. In addition, I will be providing some resources and first steps for those interested in developing a first draft of the theory of change. Listeners who have experience designing theories of change may find this a useful reminder. For those who want more detailed information about assumptions, monitoring, and evaluation in theories of change, my colleague Andrew Clappison from Comms Consult will be posting podcasts in the next few days that share more for those seeking to improve existing theories of change. If you are new to using theories of change, one of the first questions you may have is, what is a theory of change? While there are many definitions, most people agree that a theory of change explains the pathway through which a specific result or goal can be achieved. Theories of change can be extremely detailed, or they can be fairly simple. However, most theories of change have at least three major components, and these are things that we'll talk about over the course of the presentation. First, a theory of change defines the result that an organization is trying to achieve. Second, it defines a set of outcomes that an organization has control over and believes will help to achieve the result. Most theories of change define multiple activities to address any single intended result. The third component of the theory of change is information regarding how the activities should lead to the intended results. Some organizations call these assumptions, which is a term that we'll use, while others think of these steps as intermediary outcomes. A simple theory of change often takes the form of a linear pathway, such as the one in the presentation, with results defined on one side and activities on the other. And the assumptions of how are in the middle, defining a pathway from activities to results. In reality, the activities and assumptions in a theory of change are often not linear. In the slide, this is an example of a more realistic theory of change from an organization called Twaweza, which is based in Tanzania. A few things stand out about this theory of change. First, there are multiple results, such as knowledge of what works and healthy, educated, and confident people. And these results reinforce each other. Second, activities may lead to many different intermediary steps at the same time. So you can see this from the different arrows that are going from a single activity to multiple assumptions or outcomes. While real pathways to change are very complex, it may be helpful to start with a simpler theory of change, something that you will have an opportunity to do later in this presentation. Many organizations are introduced to a theory of change when a project or donor asks them to produce one. However, theories of change can be extremely useful tools for think tanks, even when they are not a required part of a project. Now, this is true for a number of reasons. First, theories of change can help you to articulate the things that you need to know for a project or strategy to work. Most organizations think about these things anyway, but the theories of change provide a really useful structure to think through them. To conduct or to develop a theory of change, you'll need to define your results. What is it that you are trying to achieve? You'll need to define activities and strategies. Looking over the course of the project or initiative, what are all the things that you need to do for results to be achieved? You'll need to define assumptions. What are the other things that need to happen, the things that are outside of your control, in order for the results to be achieved? And are these assumptions realistic? Finally, a theory of change also often requires you to consider context. What are the exogenous factors that may guide decisions regarding activities, assumptions, or even results? For example, A country that has a single party rule with no political competition may undertake very different strategies or activities for engaging policymakers than one that does not have political competition. Even if this is not defined explicitly in the theory of change, it's something to consider as you're defining the activities and strategies. In addition to helping you define your project, a theory of change is also useful insofar as it is a living document. Many organizations make the mistake of creating a theory of change and then never revisiting it. As you begin leading a project and gathering more evidence about context, assumptions, and activities, it's useful to consider making changes in the project by reviewing your theory of change. What are the new assumptions? Or the assumptions that you had originally defined but are now proving to not be valid? What does that mean for your activities? When we discuss theories of change, we often talk about project-level theories of change. However, organizations can also have theories of change for their larger institutional strategies and goals. The basic structure and process for defining project and organization level theories of change is the same. The main differences are in terms of magnitude and complexity. For an organization theory of change, oftentimes the types of results that are being defined are larger scale and longer term. For example, increasing use of evidence of policymaking. Organization level theories of change are often more complex than those at the project level, and they cover a full set of activities for an organization. On the other hand, project level theories of change define generally more specific and concrete results. For example, changing a specific policy. They're often simpler than organization theories of change, and they only cover activities for a single project. The important thing to realize as you're defining a theory of change is that for any goal you have or result you want to achieve, it's possible or it should be possible to design a theory of change. As discussed earlier in the presentation, there are three major components to a theory of change, although different scholars may have different terms for these components. Let's take an example to highlight the different components of a pretty simple theory of change, in this case, one that focuses on freedom of information legislation. The first part of the theory of change is the result or goal. In this case, the organization has set a policy goal of the government passing a freedom of information law for the country. It is worth noting a few things about this goal. First, it is not directly in the control of the think tank. While the organization can and plans to conduct activities to contribute to this goal, they cannot just decide to make this happen. It's a result that will happen further down the road. Second, there's only a single result defined here, and the theory of change branches out from there. While you can define more than one result for your theory of change, it's often easiest to start with a single result. Third, it is helpful to think of results as you might think of goals or objectives. The smarter you can make them, the better. A smart result should be specific, it should be measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. You can probably look at this result and think of ways to make the result, in this particular example, smarter. The second part of the theory of change is the assumptions, or intermediate steps. These are steps that must happen for the result to be achieved, but still things that are not in the direct control of the think tank. In this example, the think tank defines two things that need to happen in order for the government to pass a freedom of information law. The first is that the government must know that their constituents want this law. This assumes that key officials are responsive to constituent priorities. The second assumption is that the government sees evidence that similar laws have worked in other countries. There is normally more than just one assumption in a theory of change. You may in fact be able to think of other assumptions that the think tank should have built into this particular example of a theory of change. There may also be different layers or levels of assumptions. For example, the assumption that the government knows that their constituents want a Freedom of Information law may be dependent on the assumptions that the constituents actually want the act and that citizens feel like they can voice this priority. In each case, assumptions can be matched with activities. These are direct things that the think tank can undertake to make sure that the assumptions or intermediate steps hold true. It may be helpful to take a moment and think of other assumptions that would need to be in place in your country for this example. After the assumptions or intermediate steps, a theory of change should outline the activities that the organization will undertake. These should be linked to the assumptions and should be designed directly to try to address them. In the example, you can see that the organization will undertake 2 activities to ensure the government knows its constituents want Freedom of Information acts. It will conduct a perception survey to assess demand for Freedom of Information laws, and it will conduct individual meetings with the executive officers to share the findings. Similarly, the organization defines 2 activities to ensure that the government sees evidence that FOIA has worked in other countries. They will conduct a study reviewing Freedom of Information acts in other countries to collect evidence, and they will hold an event launching findings at a key point in the policymaking cycle. It is worth noting that the activities here are both research and PAC activities. While you may do a theory of change that only includes one type of activity, most results that a think tank seeks to achieve will include both research and PAC because they're so tied together. The theory of change often does not provide great detail on how activities will be carried out. For example, who the organization will partner with, or the steps to complete the perception survey and analysis in this example. However, it may be helpful to refer back to the theory of change when designing these steps. While context is not explicitly defined in this theory of change, you can see how it works into the activities. Context can help you decide what activities are best suited for the environment in which you are working. For example, holding individual meetings with the executive versus holding a large launch event for the public. There's no hard rule about the number of activities for each assumption, and you may be able to think of more activities that you would undertake in your own country to ensure that each of the assumptions in this example are met. Now that we've gone through one example, the next obvious question is how do you actually go about creating a theory of change? And this closely links to the components that we just discussed. Creating a good theory of change is quite challenging. It often takes several iterations, and as I mentioned earlier, a good theory of change is a living document that changes with the project and as the context and assumptions may change. But for those creating a theory of change for the first time, there are 3 basic steps you can take. And they actually start with the results, not the activities. This is a common mistake that organizations make when they're first starting a theory of change. The first step is to start with the result, defining what you are trying to achieve. And again, the smarter that you can make this result or goal, the better and the more useful it will be for your theory of change. Second, working backwards, you can define the assumptions that need to be true to achieve that defined results. And again, these assumptions can be layered and take place over several levels. Third, and finally, you can define the activities that your organization can undertake to ensure that the assumptions or intermediate outcomes hold. Theories of change are not always simple and linear, but in the process of starting to work with them, it may be helpful to start by thinking about a more linear theory of change. If you want to practice or want to try your own theory of change, the best thing to do is to select a project and begin working through these steps. Select a project that you're familiar with and go through the steps outlined in the slide, defining the results, assumptions, and activities. From there, you can ask yourself if the theory makes sense. Are there assumptions you are missing or activities you need to add? I want to encourage anyone who goes through this exercise to share the results and the theory of change that you develop with the R2A community or directly with me. I would be happy to provide feedback either during the call on Friday or at another time. Finally, a theory of change is only as useful as the amount that you actually use it. Many organizations create theories of change as a requirement to a donor or a partner and then never look at them again. But a theory of change can be extremely useful if you make the effort to use it. First, when you're creating your initial theory of change, make sure to ask for feedback. You'll find that colleagues and partners and others may be able to help you identify assumptions that are unrealistic or other activities that you want to undertake. Second, define a plan to monitor and evaluate your theory of change. This is something that we'll be discussing more in future podcasts. And remember that you might not get there the first time. A theory of change is really challenging to develop and to design. And the important thing is that when you realize that parts of your theory of change are not working, you go back and you revise them. Similarly, if you're monitoring or evaluating a project that you're working on and you find that one of the activities that you plan to undertake is not actually working, use that evaluation or use that monitoring results to go back to your theory of change. Finally, you can use the information that you get from your monitoring and evaluation in two ways. First, you can build it into future work. Even though you're monitoring and evaluating around a particular theory of change, some of the results from your evaluation may help you on future projects. And second, you can use this information to revise your theory of change. Remember that the best theory of change is a living document. Don't let it just sit on a shelf and collect dust. So I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. I hope that you've learned a little bit more about why theories of change can be useful and how to create them yourself. Over the next 2 days, my colleague Andrew will be posting 2 additional podcasts on defining assumptions and conducting monitoring and evaluation for theories of change. These podcasts are useful for both beginners and for those who have done theories of change before. If you have any questions, please feel welcome to contact me, and I wish you the best of luck as you begin working on your theories of change.